Again, if any of you did not get any handouts, we'll make sure to hand those out to you. All right, take a look at this picture. That's going to pop up in a second. I can see it. You can't, but now you can. Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens was one of my father's favorite authors. This will not be the class to discuss the benefits of reading Charles Dickens. I will tell you, in my humble opinion, Tale of Two Cities has the best opening line and best ending line of any classic novel ever written historically, but that's neither here nor there. But his vivid prose and elegant use of symbolism, and probably because Dad liked him, became a favorite of mine as well too. And it's in his classic novel, Great Expectations, where we're introduced to the well-respected and fiercely admired lawyer, Mr. Jaggers, who on more than one occasion dictates to the main character, Pip, this statement: take nothing on its looks, take everything on evidence, there is no better rule. You agree with that statement? Take nothing on its looks, take everything on evidence, there is no better rule. Do you agree with that statement? I do. Even as New Testament Christians, we have faith in God. We've talked about the sovereign God who has made claims about being the ultimate sovereign. But the basis for those extravagant claims are based on evidence. The evidence is He is the Creator, right? He created everything. And so as we talked about in this class about authority, He not only has the power, but the right to rule. And so it is with each and every one of us. We look to evidence that is set before us to understand who God is and what His expectations are of us. It's a unique word, expectation. What is meant by that word? We've heard that before. Lewis uses it in the title of his novel. But what do we mean, or what do people mean when they say expectations? How would you define that? What are expectations?
I wrote the dictionary
Yeah.
down. A strong belief that something will happen or be the case in the future.
Okay, strong belief that something will happen or be the case in the future. Catherine, is that what you had or something similar?
Yes, I had that, and also a belief that someone will or should achieve something.
All right, did y'all hear that? Belief that somebody will or should achieve something. I'm going to add something to the definition based on evidence. We use sometimes the word expectations in a fantasy thing, okay? We think this is going to happen. But in reality, expectations, having a strong belief that something is going to occur in the future, right? Whether it's ourselves or as parents that we think about our children, is still based on evidence and things that we do. Do you agree with that? We do that every day as parents. When we first found out the sex of our child, we might have thought our expectations for our children. If it was a boy and it was Tommy Matthews, he's thinking about, boy, I expect my boy maybe to play baseball, right? Or maybe helping your son graduate and expectations of doing well in school and becoming a success in that respect. Or those of us that had daughters, we have expectations of one day perhaps maybe walking her down the aisle, or maybe helping develop her into the godly woman that she should be. Expectations, right? And the reason we have expectations, and also that God has expectations for us, is they help forge a path for us to avoid the potential pitfalls of life. Think about that. Expectations help us forge a pathway to avoid the pitfalls of life. You as parents, do you think about that when you're thinking about expectations for your children or your grandchildren? It's the key. Clearly communicated expectations are key to relationships. Brethren, our Heavenly Father is no exception. There are expectations He has for us. And dare I say it, great expectations. And what we're going to talk about over the next class periods or two, authoritative expectations. I'm reminded of a statement Peter makes in 2 Peter, the first chapter. We won't read the entire context here, but beginning in verse 2, Peter writes, "Grace and peace be multiplied to you in the knowledge of God and of Jesus our Lord, seeing that His divine power has granted to us everything pertaining to life and godliness through the true knowledge of Him who called us by His own glory and excellence. For by these He has granted to us His precious and magnificent promises, so that by them you may become partakers of the divine nature, having escaped the corruption that is in the world by lust. Now for this very reason also, applying all diligence in your faith, supply moral excellence, etc., etc., etc." In this passage is Peter, through inspiration, telling us some expectations that God has of us, just in these verses alone. He has given us evidence. Look, first of all, what's the evidence that Peter describes that has been given to us? Knowledge of God and Jesus Christ our Lord, seeing, that's evidence, what? His divine power has granted to us everything pertaining to life and godliness. How? Text. Through the knowledge of Him who called us, okay? For by these, here's what He has in store for us, He has granted to us His precious and magnificent promises. Look at the next phrase. So that by them you may what? Become partakers of the divine nature. And what else? Escape the corruption that is in the world by lust. Are those not expectations that God has for us? His Son died so that we might become partakers of the divine nature, escaping the corruption. Do you guys see that? God has expectations for us. And it's expectations based on evidence that we see of who He is and what He has done for us through His Son, through creation, and all sorts of things. For spiritual growth to occur, it takes two things: God's activity and our cooperation. The first has already been set. God's activity has already been set. The challenge becomes the second part, our cooperation. And that's the whole thing that we're talking about this quarter. God has authority. And not to be flippant, so what? So what? And we need to respond to that, and we need to look at those expectations and respond to His authority in the right way. Paul's words to the Romans are helpful. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is, and that which is good and acceptable and perfect. Discerning God's will raises the bar of our moral expectations. Discerning His will, understanding and proving what the will of His God is, raises the bar of moral expectations. Question, and we're going to look at this passage here in a second. In Romans 15:4, what is the point for Christians? Here's the text. For whatever was written in earlier times was written for our instruction, so that through perseverance and the encouragement of the Scriptures we might have hope. In your own words as Christians, what's the point Paul is making here just in this verse?
Knowledge of the Scripture affects our attitude toward the present and the future.
Okay. Knowledge of the Scriptures affect our attitude towards the present and the future. I like that. Anybody else want to add anything to that? What else? What does he mean when he talks about whatever was written in earlier times? Think of context. Prophecies, and where do we find those prophecies, Dee? In the Old Testament. Paul will also talk about another occasion about how the Old Testament was a tutor that brought us to Christ, right? So we're going to look at some examples in the Old Testament and see what I think is repeated over and over again, this pattern of God's expectations in the Old Testament for His children, and make some applications for us. So, I've asked you to do this. We're not going to take the time to read all these texts. You've had the handouts. These stories are familiar stories to you. This will probably be very basic, but sometimes the simple lessons in life are basic, and they need to be repeated. So, what instructions should be taken from the following narratives? Think of, for example, first of all, in Noah. The story and narrative of Noah in Genesis chapter 6. What do you take from that regarding authority and God's expectations? What was Noah, I'll get it started. What was Noah told to do? Build an ark. Okay? Was he given specific instructions on how to build that ark? Absolutely. What did Noah do? He did it. Did he do it in his own way? He did it exactly the way God had intended and told him to do it. What was the result? He was saved in his household, right? Pretty simple. Abel, what do you know from the story of Abel? We know there in Genesis, the 4th chapter, Abel sacrificed or brought to the Lord the first fruits and sacrificed to him, right? Did the Lord accept that? Yes, he did. Was he pleased with it? Yes, he was. And Abraham, there's a whole lot in the story of Abraham, but think specifically at the very beginning there in Genesis, the 12th chapter. What was Abraham told to do? Leave his home. I'm not a geography guy. Is that a pretty long journey from where Abraham lived to where he was told to go? Especially by foot? How old is Abram approximately when he leaves? Or actually exactly how old is he? 75. So God tells him, get up, leave your family, and go to the land that I'll show you. What does Abraham do? He obeyed. He just did it. And what does the Hebrew writer tell us about Abraham? Because of his obedience. And there's other things too. What was that? Reckon him for righteousness. Okay? And we can go on and on about other examples. There's also the flip side of those examples, right? What about Cain? We talked about Abel. What did Cain do? Did Cain offer up a sacrifice to God? Yeah. Was it acceptable? No. Was God pleased with him? No. What about Nadab and Abihu there in Leviticus, the 10th chapter? What do you know about the law? What were they commanded to do when they offered up the sacrifices? Say that again? Well, that's what they ended up doing, but what were they told to do? What were they told to do? Turn over, if you would, to Exodus, the 30th chapter. Exodus 30, verse 9. We're going to get there. They did offer up strange fire, but how did they know it was strange? Exodus chapter 30, verse 9. Exodus 30. Aaron, you've got that? Read that for me, please, sir. Pretty simple, right? What had the law said to the priests when they were offering up fire? Don't offer strange fire. Then we get to Leviticus chapter 10. What do Nadab and Abihu do? Because it says it there in the text. What did they do? I'm hearing all sorts of things, which is good. They offered strange fire. They weren't supposed to. And what was the ramifications of that? They died immediately. Now look at Numbers 15. This is a passage that may not be as well known in the historical narrative. Numbers, probably for most of us, would you agree, is not one of the books that just people get excited about reading. You know, it's probably not my top 10. But there's a lot of good information. Here's one of them. While the sons of Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man gathering wood on the Sabbath day. And those who found him gathering wood brought him to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation. And they put him in custody because it had not been declared what should be done to him. We're going to come back to that in a second. Then the Lord said to Moses, the man shall surely be put to death. All the congregation shall stone him with stones outside the camp. And so all the congregation brought him outside the camp and stoned him to death with stones just as the Lord had commanded Moses. Little obscure passage. We don't know the name of the man. What was the problem? What was it? It was the Sabbath. I'm not sure why the text says this, but verse 34, they put him in custody because it had not been declared what should be done to him. Was that true? Turn over to Exodus chapter 35. Exodus chapter 35. Ethan, you've got that? Read beginning in verses 2 and go through 3. 35, 2 and 3. This is not the only time that it talks about the Sabbath and what they should do and what they shouldn't do, right? But in this particular example, we see it should have been clear to the whole entire nation they were to do no work, not even kindle a fire on the Sabbath. That was God's expectation of them. I don't want you to do it. And so, what did this man do in Numbers 15? He gathered sticks. Gathered sticks, right? It didn't say he made a fire, but he gathered sticks. And then we look at the consequences. He was stoned to death by commandment of the Lord. I'm going to just ask this question. Does that seem harsh to you? Does that seem harsh to you? I'm going to shake my head. Well, does that seem harsh to you, Will, on the surface? Seems pretty harsh to me. What's the lesson? I'm not here to debate that or other texts. That's not the purpose of what we're talking about this morning. Despite your feelings about how harsh that seemed for what we would probably describe as a minor offense for us, gathering sticks on the Sabbath, the consequences and what happens in verse 35 of Numbers 15 tells us what lesson? God is sovereign. Here, I'm going to let you come up because you're doing great. God is sovereign. We need to respect His authority. That's a tough lesson. That's a tough lesson then. I think of that. I mean, the text doesn't tell us. I think about the man's family. Okay? Do you think it made an impression on the nation of Israel? Those of you that remember or are, well, you all are good students. Stoning wasn't pleasant. Stoning as a punishment, stoning to death, was not pleasant. And it wasn't, I would argue, quick, probably, right? Painful, excruciating, and many participated in it. Do you ever think about that? This is Eric's sidebar. Who stoned him to death? Moses? Who? The people. Is there a lesson there? Huh? Is there a lesson there? I mean, now, do we know historically, did the Israelites, the nation of Israel, get this lesson about respecting God's sovereign authority? Did they get it? No, they did not get it. And on the surface, I may go, well, that amazes me on situations like this. But then again, I look at my own life and start to think too, do we get it? Do we get it? We've talked about this, but I want us to drill this home this morning. What simple pattern do we find in each of these examples? We'll start with one. Expectations of God. We see in all of these examples, both good and bad, regardless of the consequences, that there was some sort of expectation that was defined by God. It's the first thing. Second part of the pattern is this. There were actions on the part of the people, and I'm going to add this, created in His own image. The sovereign Creator had expectations, communicated those expectations, and then there were actions that we see on the part of those individuals who were created in God's own image. What do you think the next part of the pattern is? Consequences. Consequences of action. When we think of consequences of action, do we think positive or negative usually when we hear the word consequences? Usually think of negative. Don't just think negative, brethren. Okay? Has a negative, in our vernacular today, but there were consequences of the actions. Were there good consequences that came from following God's commandments? Yeah, we read about that. We see that, right? But there were also, right, some pretty blatant and blunt consequences if they did not obey. So, by their actions, these individuals either submitted to God as the ultimate standard of authority, or they did not. Plain and simple. And either way, they either enjoyed or suffered the consequences of their action in light of God's authority. So, what should we take away? What's our takeaway? And guys, this is nothing new. You all are students of the Bible. These are pretty basic things, right? So what's the takeaway, D? Yeah. Go ahead. I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree with you.
I don't believe obedience gives you a consequence. Obedience gives you justification to expect a reward.
I don't necessarily disagree with you, and we can talk about it a little bit later on. But we're on the same page. Okay, we're on the same page. We're on the same page. So what's the pattern? What's our takeaway?
Obey God and have expectations of a just reward. Disobey God and have expectations of the consequence.
So, two sides, right? Do you guys see that? Two sides.
You made a statement about do we believe that capital punishment, basically, what we're talking about, when someone disobeys the commandment of God, and either eternal capital punishment or immediate capital punishment until you life. Do we think that? Well, of course we do. But we're not God. We didn't make the rules. We are servants of the Master, not judges of the
Right. D, I agree with that. Let me ask this question. Does humankind agree with that statement? Do they? And listen, brethren, sometimes do New Testament Christians fully understand that and believe that. And that's the whole point of this. Like I said at the very beginning, the authority of God and what are we going to do about it is a fundamental concept in Christianity. Fundamental. And I do think, and this is my opinion, and I have been known to be wrong many a times, but I do think that there are times where even New Testament Christians don't get it and don't appreciate the authority of God. They may give lip service to it, but even with the point we were making there in Numbers, boy, that's harsh. And I'll say it this way. I'm going to jump here to this page. Turn over to Romans for a second. Romans the 11th chapter. Don't misunderstand what I'm about to say. Sometimes we focus on the mercy and goodness of God. Is that accurate? Is that right? Yeah, it is. New Testament talks about that. The Old Testament talks about that. God's mercy and the goodness of God, right? But look at Romans, the 11th chapter for me. In this analogy of, and he's talking about Jews and Gentiles and grafting onto the wild olive branch and the root. But look at what Paul writes about there in verse 22. Somebody who's got that, read that for me. Josh, you have that? Go ahead, read that for me.
Verse 22.
Verse 22.
Know then the kindness and severity of God. Severity towards those who have fallen, but God's kindness towards you. Provided you continue in his kindness. Otherwise you will be cut off.
Two words that Paul talks about that we need to be aware of. What's one of them? Goodness or kindness, right? What's the other? Severity. We're going to talk about this on Wednesday. Don't misunderstand me. I've heard this phrase before. I don't disagree with it at its core. But you have heard, or I have heard the phrase, the New Testament is God's love letter to man. And I think there's some truth to that. But brethren, what I want us to be mindful of is don't forget the consequences or severity of disobeying sovereign God. And that, in my humble opinion, may be the challenge that some of us as New Testament Christians have. I'm not saying we shouldn't emphasize the mercy of God. We're all sinners. We've done nothing to save ourselves. God has done it all. There are expectations that He has for us. We follow God, and we shouldn't be following Him begrudgingly, right? But brethren, if we don't get the lesson of the severity of the punishment, of the consequences of disobeying a sovereign God, we've missed it. The religious world today views God as love. Is that accurate? Absolutely, it's true. But I think to the detriment of not talking about the other as well too. Okay? That's I think one of Paul's points here. We need to understand the consequences of lawlessness. Steve's going to talk about that next week. The consequences of lawlessness and neglecting the authoritative expectations of our sovereign Lord. There are indeed times when Scripture should, number one, make us feel uncomfortable. There are times that we go to passages for comfort, right? I don't question that at all. There's many of passages that we go for comfort and hope, right? But brethren, there are times when we read Scripture, it should make us uncomfortable. Why should it make us uncomfortable?
We're on that borderline tiptoeing it too.
Okay.
And we're saying, well, I've got to be careful here because God is a just God, but He's also a righteous God who will hold me accountable.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
We're not doing what we need to be doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Did your children feel uncomfortable? Could you tell, those of us that were parents, fathers and mothers, can you tell when your children have done something wrong most of the time? You can tell, right? Tell by the look on their face. They were uncomfortable around you. They've done something that they shouldn't have done, right? Disobeyed you. Number two, Scripture should make us be uncomfortable at times. It should undermine our complacency. Is that a danger of New Testament Christianity and New Testament Christians today? We can become complacent with the phrase, God is love. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. That is a biblical concept. That's the nature of God, right? Part of the nature of God. But if that's all we're focusing on, that's all we're stressing and talking about, we can get complacent. Okay? We can get complacent. All right? So number one, Scripture sometimes should make us be uncomfortable, undermine our complacency. And number two, it should upend our usual pattern of behavior. Scripture should upend our usual pattern of behavior. There's an interesting phrase in Jeremiah, the 5th chapter, where God is talking about the children of Israel and Judah, and he quotes something that is said by those people because they're listening to other prophets and they're not listening to Jeremiah. And Jeremiah's message is one of what? What's Jeremiah's message in Jeremiah to the nation? What's that? repent, but that's part of that message. That's a critical part of the message. What else in the bigger context? What's going to happen to them, Aaron? Destruction's coming. Destruction's coming. God has been long-suffering, but there is coming a time where destruction's coming. And there were prophets then talking to the people that were going, no, it's not going to happen. And in Jeremiah, the 5th chapter, I believe it's verses 22 and 23, Jeremiah, or God, quotes the nation or the people and paraphrases this by saying, misfortune won't come upon us. We're God's children. God's love. Misfortune won't come. Did misfortune come upon the nation? But then all you got to do is read Lamentations. Read Lamentations, and you answer that question, right? So, the foundation of what we're talking about is based on a prime assumption. Number one, God created all. We talked about that. We established that, right? Number two, therefore, all creation is His. You agree with those statements? Number two, with creation comes expectations. Okay? With expectations comes responsibility. And with responsibility comes accountability. And finally, with accountability can come consequences, or as Dee mentioned, can come rewards, right? Okay, but we need to be accountable for our actions, right? It's a simple pattern. Expectations of God, actions of people, and what happens, consequences, rewards. You see that? Pretty basic, pretty fundamental, but do we get that message? I don't know. Do we get that message? I want you to look again at the Old Testament examples, specifically Noah and Abraham. Noah was told to make an ark out of gopher wood. According to the text, did Noah question at all? Did he? Did he, Mike? I think it would be better if I use pine, right? All right? If I think it would be better if I build it according to these dimensions, right? And from what I know from history and other discussions, rain, torrential rain from the heavens and flood just hadn't occurred. That's not how the earth was watered. And I'm told to build a boat this big? I mean, I keep thinking of all the questions I would have. We don't know. We don't see that from Noah. Then we go to Abraham. 75 years he's lived in the Chaldees. Ur of the Chaldees. And God tells him what? Get up and go. What does Abraham do? Goes. Did he question? Would you have questioned? Mike shaking. I probably would. Would you? Fine. Well, let's go to the other story in the narrative. He's asked to offer up his only son Isaac as a sacrifice. What does the text tell us that he does? What's the text tell us? What's that?
He gets up and does it.
Gets up and does it. Early. Yeah. Woo. And even so much that when Isaac looks around and, what's his response? God will provide. God will provide. So I wonder, we look at individuals like Noah and Abraham and others in Hebrews chapter 11, these great men and women of faith. And sometimes we question ourselves and we go, well, I can't do that. God expects the same thing of you and me. I think we miss that. What does he want for his people? He wants his people to obey him. But this is not an expectation that is impossible. Nor is it an expectation without a reward. Look at Deuteronomy, the 30th chapter. We won't take the time to read the whole text, but it says there, "For the Lord will again rejoice over you for good, just as he rejoiced over your fathers. if you obey the Lord your God to keep his commandments and his statutes which are written in this book of the law, if you turn to the Lord your God with all your heart and soul, for this commandment which I am commanding you today is not too difficult for you, nor is it far away. Okay? He's going to rejoice over you for good. Just because he likes you, Aaron? Look, just because he likes you? We have conditional statements there, right? What's his expectations? Verse 10. What's the first one? If you obey. Little small words mean a lot. Conjunctions like and, or, but, the word if. And if you obey the Lord, if you turn to the Lord there with all your heart and soul. But look there at verse 11. And the statement God makes about his commandments, about his law, and more importantly, about this expectations of you and I, in this case the children of Israel, you can follow those. And I'm going to rejoice over you. But what does he say in verse 11? What's he say? It's not far away, but what's that? You can do it. You can do it. The commandment which I am commanding you today is not too difficult for you. Do we look at situations like what we described with Abraham offering up Isaac or told off and go, wow, those are difficult? Do you think of a New Testament, something that Paul writes about that's similar to this? What do you think of? Okay, there's one. All right, what else?
You're not going to be pursuing the sin is too difficult for you not to escape.
Okay, that's the one that comes to my mind, right? There's no temptation. Do you remember that statement right there? But God has provided a way of escape. There's also passages about his Son, how he's the perfect mediator of a new covenant, right? Because he understands the temptation and he conquered, and so can we. It's the same message, brethren. It's the same message. God gives commandments or expectations of his people, expects them to obey him. Does he have the right to expect that obedience? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And it is not too difficult for you. Will that take faith sometimes? I'm looking out at this auditorium, and I know people in situations in their lives, things that have happened recently, things that have happened in the past, that brings you to your knees. I think of stories like Job. I think of some of the Psalms of David. Human nature, I think there are moments in our lives where we think, what I am asked to do is too difficult. It's too difficult. God says it's not. Why is it not too difficult? Have you thought about that? Why is it not too difficult? Turn to God with all your heart and soul. Why is it not too difficult sometimes? I would argue it is difficult. It can be difficult, right? Okay? There are moments in our lives that draw us to our knees, right? But we're not alone. Do you get that? That's the most comforting thing. Remember we talked about the imminence of sovereignty? You remember that on Wednesday? The nearness of God. We don't have a sovereign ruler that has just made a bunch of rules and say obey them and I'm stepping away and you're just going to listen to them. God is near. And the picture is painted no clearer than when we open up the pages of the New Testament. God came, flesh, lived, suffered, and died for you and me. I don't have to do it alone. And there are times we feel that way, right? God takes delight in His people who obey His commandments. He expects His people to obey His commandments that He has given to them. Does this weary us? Has God done so little that we cannot be bothered to listen to God's way and follow in God's paths? Has God done so little that we cannot be bothered to pay attention to the details of God's law? Build me an ark. Were there details in there? Outside of just building an ark? Absolutely. Has God done so little that we ignore doing right to others, showing mercy to others, and walking humbly with the Lord? Does God have a case against us? Have we followed in the path of Israel and are worthy of judgment because our lives do not reflect what God desires? Sobering questions, right? Sobering questions for you and for me. He has expectations, and we've seen that in the Old Testament. What does He require of us? And what are we going to do about it? God is not asking for us to do the impossible. There's comfort in that. I'm reminded in Psalm, the 19th chapter, the first part of the psalm talks about God's creation, right? All right? And then it moves to God's revealed word. When it talks about God's revealed word, we sing a song about it. What are the descriptive words used to describe about God's word and His commandments? More to be desired are they than gold, yea, than much fine gold, sweeter also than honey and the honeycomb. You get that? That's in the text of Psalm 19 where it's talking about God's revealed word. And what's in God's revealed word? His commandments. And what he expects of us to do. And the psalmist describes those as they are to be desired. Listen, brethren, if our obedience to God is always done begrudgingly, we've missed the point. We've missed the point completely. If our obedience to God is always begrudgingly, and we don't look to the rewards, and we don't have that mindset of His commandments are to be desired more than gold, and sweeter also than honey and the honeycomb, there's great value. It will fulfill and enrich us. God's commandments are not impossible. They're there, as we talked about before, His expectations to help us forge paths to avoid the pitfalls that Satan has before us. We need to understand that. Focused anticipation leads to wholehearted appreciation. That's all I got for you. That was the first bell, all right, and we're about to do the second. In the back in the foyer, we'll have handouts for the class that we're going to cover on Wednesday. We've talked about His authoritative expectations in the Old Testament. We're now going to shift and look at what the Bible has to say in the New Testament about authority. Okay, and what's His expectations there? And I think we're going to find what? Similar statements, right? All right. Any other questions or comments? Appreciate you guys. You're out early. See, Ethan, don't ever let me say I don't let you out early. You're out early. Come go.